Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay? My name's Amy Hudnor, and I'm the private well coordinator in New Hampshire. And the position of the private well coordinator was created in about 2021, and I'm the first person to take on that role. Many folks had been working and serving private well owners before that time, but this position was officially created and staffed in 2021. So I'm going to talk about New Hampshire private wells in general, and then I'm going to go over in depth a couple of our main outreach approaches over the last few years. One is a community private well workshop model that I've been running over the last 3 years or so. And then we also have a targeted PFAS outreach water testing effort. So I'll go over those in some detail, and then I will also talk about how they compare and contrast with past outreach methods that we've used and how they influence success being measured by about how much well testing occurs from each method. So we have, a lot of private well owners. It's 45% of our population, which we're a small state, so we only have 1.3 million people approximately, so about 550, almost 600,000 are private well users. So it makes up quite a big chunk of our state. And, most people have drilled wells, drilled into we're known as the granite state, so drilled into the granite bedrock. But we do have plenty of dug well owners, and just this morning I was talking to someone. My phone number kind of is the private well hotline in New Hampshire, and I'm trying to keep up with my calls, so I'm calling people at 7 a.m., which is 8 a.m. Eastern time. And I talked to a gentleman this morning that had a fieldstone line dug well with E. coli. So there are plenty, and then also folks using springs. And we also have these, you probably all have them too, but these places where there are pipes just sticking out of the hill, and drivers pull up with big jugs and they fill up their water bottles, and other people see them doing that and they assume that it's safe. So these, we call them roadside springs. We have a number of those too. So the project I've been focused the most of my time on over the last few years is this workshop model. And the way that it works is we invite every private well user in town to attend a workshop. Sometimes it's groups of towns clumped together. And everyone's invited, all private well users. And our workshop is about an hour long, and we talk about the health. I talk a lot about the health effects of different contaminants, and also water testing and water treatment. And we go over our Be Well Informed tool and how that can help you make treatment decisions. The in-person nature of the workshop allows it so that we are able to hand out test kits at the workshop. So you have to come in person, and at the end of the workshop, you will pick a test kit and you get to choose a date. And this is, I think, a critical component in getting test returns. So when you pick up your test kit, it's got a sticker. You're choosing from a set of dates. And on that date, you're committing to taking your sample early in the morning, bringing it to the town hall or the fire station, a designated location. And then we come and get the samples and get their results out to them. So I feel like having them commit to a date and a location keeps them on a schedule where they know that if they set this thing on the counter and forget about it, then they're going to miss out on the water testing. The water testing is free, and we test for arsenic, bacteria, PFAS, manganese, copper, lead. It's quite comprehensive. It's everything that we recommend New Hampshire private wells test for. So we've been able to get about 12% of the well households in each town that we've done this model. And it's varied from about 8% to about 15%, but it's been around in that ballpark of about 12% participation. And we find that once folks have made the commitment to come to these workshops, just about everyone returns with their test kit, returns with their sample. We don't have too many test kits out there that are sitting on shelves. And we kind of let them know that, like, you gotta get it on this date, or you're not gonna be able to follow up later. You gotta do this on our schedule. So, and it's a short drive for them. They don't have to drive a long distance to the lab. So this is what we've been finding. For the most part, we did this workshop model in the seacoast area, and that area is known to have a lot of arsenic. So that's what we found the most above our very protective limit of 5 parts per billion. So really almost 40% of participants were above this 5 parts per billion arsenic. We're also finding a lot of radon. Again, we have a pretty protective limit of 2,000 picocuries per liter, in which we recommend folks also test their air and consider air and/or water treatment. Almost 30% of households had above 2,000. And we also found quite a bit of PFAS. That's our next bar on the chart here. 22% had at least one PFAS above the more protective EPA standards. We had previously had a PFAS standard in New Hampshire that was a little bit higher levels than what the new EPA standard is. But this part of the state, the seacoast area, the southeastern part of New Hampshire, somewhat, it tends to be the higher PFAS area in our state, and then coincidentally, the bedrock, the arsenic, is also more prevalent in this area. And of course, we found coliform bacteria and some stagnant lead. So we've sent everyone a survey after about 2 months after they received their water test result. And it has a lot of questions, but the main concern that I'm thinking about is, what are they doing after they get their water test result? And so this is how folks answered the question for those who had contaminants above, or at least one contaminant above health limits, what actions have you taken? So at 2 months after water test, we've got 48 households installed or in the process of installing treatment. Then the next most popular response was, haven't taken action yet, but I plan to. Then some folks researching treatment, but still deciding. Some folks are reviewing maintenance requirements of my existing treatment. We ask folks to sample at their kitchen tap as opposed to the raw water, because a lot of folks already do have some sort of treatment, and we want them to know what's the quality of their drinking water. And sometimes in the course of doing that, you figure out, oh gosh, this wasn't really removing arsenic. It might be a water softener, and it's not doing the trick for arsenic. So sometimes people are going back and looking at their treatments. So yeah, for the most part, people are really taking action. This is kind of a committed bunch. After they've gone through this workshop and followed up on their water testing, they're generally following through with some sort of action to protect themselves after participation. Okay, so we also have another major testing program, and that's our PFAS testing. And this method generates about 50 to 60% participation of the target population. And in this case, it's not a target where we're saying everybody in town, to come on and participate. It is really much more targeted, obviously based on, the locations and the facilities and the places we know that there are PFAS and the places we suspect that there will be PFAS. So in this model, the households are mailed a letter notifying them that PFAS has been found nearby. In some cases, that's going to be because they're near some sort of facility or some polluting source, a landfill or a fire station, and then in other cases, it's because they're near another household that has had a detection above health limits. So they'll get a letter, and they'll be offered a free water test, and DES will come to their home and take the water sample for them. So, and then in areas where they're near a PFAS source, they'll actually get a couple letters and a phone call. So in the places we know there's really high PFAS, they will get more than just one letter. They'll get a lot of attempts at contact. And then, so we've also had funding. At times, it's been some intermittent, but at times this team has also been able to sample for all the other things, arsenic, radon. Currently, they're doing radon, bacteria, copper, lead, all the other things that are important to know about. So that's been really beneficial. So in this image, just shows what we found as far as PFAS. Again, we're targeting places that we know or suspect PFAS to be, so it's a fairly high, percentage of folks that do find that they have PFAS from this group, and it's a raw water sample. So we found PFOA most of all, and PFOS above the 4 parts per trillion. The red dots, the green dots are places where we've tested and there's been PFAS below health limits or not at all. And then I think the red is where it's been above the EPA very protective standard, whereas the purple, it's been above the former New Hampshire standard, so a little higher levels. But in the areas, southern New Hampshire, southeastern New Hampshire, there's been a lot of PFAS. And we are able to, fortunately, offer folks a rebate program for treatment for PFAS. If they have PFAS above the health limits, they're able to generally get a rebate of up to $5,000 for treatment or connection to a public water system, which is not really an option for most of them. We've also found plenty of arsenic in this project. So 25% of them have had arsenic above 5 micrograms per liter. We've also found a lot of manganese, 10% above that 0.3 and 21% above the protective for infants 0.1 milligram per liter. And we find a bit of uranium also, 18% of them above health limits. We've just started testing for radon in this program too, so we'll be finding radon for sure. Okay, so I gave you a little bit of significant amount of detail of what we're currently doing, those 2 community and then the targeted PFAS testing. We also have done a couple of other projects. We've done a lot of things over the years, but I wanted to kind of compare and contrast on a continuum as what we've been getting for participation rate. So at the bottom of each of these blue circles, you'll see what kind of participation we've gotten from different events. So we have done in the past these kind of like info tables where we've been there and we've had, like all this sorts of, like at the library or at the Hannaford which is a grocery store. So at the dump, a lot of places say, well, in these rural areas, everybody goes to the dump, so that's where you got to be on a Saturday morning. So we've had these info tables where we hand out test kits and information, and we put little info sheets in those test kits to track, like these are test kits we gave out at this location, and to see if they're coming back to the lab. And we found about a 1% return rate on those. So in that case, people are getting a test kit, but they have to take the samples and get them to the lab. And it's just doesn't seem to have very high return rate. And so in the community workshop model, so I kind of, at the bottom of the slide, tried to relate this to those things that we know are barriers, the barriers to well testing. In the info table model, we've given them some knowledge at this info table, and we've reduced some of the inconvenience because we've given them a test kit, so they don't have to reach out to that lab. They've already got their test kit, but they do have to take this extra step of, getting to the lab, paying for the sample. So in the community workshop, where we get about a 12% return rate, 12% participation of the private well households in that community, they attend and they follow through with water testing. We've removed a lot of those lack of knowledge barriers because we really comprehensively go through a lot of health effects, and these are the things we really want you to test for because that's what that's what's common in our groundwater. We've given them a lot of knowledge. We've also removed the cost, the financial cost. And so with those two, there is still some inconvenience because yes, you do have to take that water sample and you got to get it on that date. But it's a local location and you get to choose between a few different dates. So it does remove some inconvenience, but not all inconvenience barriers. Then with the targeted PFAS testing, where we get the 50 to 60%, we've removed some knowledge barriers. We've taught them a little bit about PFAS through the letter and the contact. If they want to ask questions, they can ask questions to know more as people are in their home taking the samples, or they follow up by phone later. We've removed the cost barrier. And we've really removed the inconvenience barrier because all they got to do is, respond to our phone calls and then open the door when we show up. Show us where the kitchen is, and they don't really have to do anything else. They got to answer the email, to look at their test results. And so that inconvenience barrier is pretty much gone in that model. So then over here on the right, we had this is not really sustainable from a staff perspective, but early in the days when DES was, kind of learning about PFAS, about in 2014, 2015, we did this door-to-door campaign. And what particular neighborhood was thought to have probably really high PFAS. And so if you lived in that neighborhood, you got this alert on your cell phone, a text, that was sort of like getting like an emergency notice and just letting them know that DES was going to be in your area and there's probably this contaminant. And so you got the alert on your phone, and then you saw a few days later, the DES vehicle driving around, stopping, and someone would knock on your door, and really you just had to let them in and take the sample. And that got almost 100% of folks that we knocked on their door, if they were home, let us come and take their sample. So that's a really high, super convenient. They're being told about a man-made contaminant, which always gets people's attention more than natural contaminants. And all the cost and inconvenience barriers are removed. So these are the kind of things that over the years have been attempted and tried, and these are sort of like the rates of participation we find. And as you go over on the right, it takes more staff resources for each one of these. So like with the community workshop, it's me doing most of the work. I do pull in folks to help speak, and I have someone who works a little bit helping me with send out results, but it's I kind of manage it. I get the town governments to help a little bit, but it's fairly low staff resources on our part. The targeted PFAS testing, that's really a team of 4 or 5 people that focus on that. And then the door-to-door campaign, that was like a few people working really long hours for a short period of time. So factors that we've observed: increased participation. Obviously, free water testing really is helpful to remove that cost barrier, but it's not everything. It's convenience, the flexibility of having a local drop-off location and being on a schedule. DES coming and collecting your samples, that really helps. The emphasis on education has been helpful in improving participation. And, man-made pollutants really get people's attention, tend to, generate more fear and more perception of risk. And, as you see in those people that were tested for PFAS because they were told that it may be or it's probably in your area, a lot of them, many of them found arsenic and manganese and uranium, so they're able to hopefully treat for those natural contaminants as well. So this is a slide that I show at all of my presentations to the public that kind of drives home the point of, like, I hope it's driving home the point. Like, make sure you think about these natural contaminants. Because my focus started out being on, it was almost, so we already had a sort of like a PFAS team, like people that focused on MTBE and PFAS, and I was sort of put over here and say, you're gonna focus on natural contaminants, but it really doesn't work that way. Like, you can't go and talk to a community just about the natural contaminants and forget about PFAS, the one thing that's always on the news and that they know about, and then vice versa. It's hard, we're always trying to get the PFAS team to say, okay, don't forget about all these other things, so, because it's, people need to know about it, and when you're deciding on a treatment system, you want to know about these confounding, potentially, what certain things can confound certain treatment for something else. So yeah, we always try to talk about both, and how they are all important for our health going forward. Okay, I'm probably way ahead of time. 5 minutes, great. So we got questions, okay. How are you able to provide free testing to a lot of people for a large amount of different contaminants, including PFAS, which are typically very expensive? Okay, so we had taken a bunch of gasoline companies to court for MTBE contamination. And we had gotten large settlements for that contamination, and we've been able to put a lot of those funds into what we call our Drinking Water Groundwater Trust Fund. And that money has been able to be used for drinking water contamination of other kinds, not just MTBE. So we've been able to be flexible with some of that money, always testing for MTBE whenever we're testing anywhere. So we've been able to utilize that. More recently, we've been able to use the, I always mess this acronym up, Emerging Contaminants for Small and Disadvantaged Communities has been able to be utilized on private wells recently. So we put a lot of our eggs in that basket for this next few years of utilizing those funds for private wells. Okay, what was the cost to your program for those free test kits? Are they processed at a local lab? So for the natural contaminants, everything but PFAS, we use our public health lab, our state lab, and they're $105, which is lower than the private labs for that same list of contaminants. And then for the PFAS, it's, we get the labs we use private labs, and we get them to bid against each other. We have to do the request for quotes. So we've been able to get about $200 a sample for 25 PFAS compounds by getting the labs to have to bid and kind of compete with each other. Are you worried about contamination or error since the well owners are taking the samples themselves? I would say a little bit, but we do a lot to teach them how to take the samples. So we have Lou Barinelli from our public health lab, water lab, stand up there. He's one of the co-presenters at the workshops, and he holds up a test kit and he goes through each bottle and explains how to take it. And we spend a lot of time on the radon vial because that's the one that's the easiest to mess up by getting airspace in there. So he shows how to, a few different methods. And we have instructions that are about 4 pages long with photos too. So that helps a lot. And if they do show up at the lab, they have their process of deciding if a sample has to be rejected because it's, the bacteria is not filled full enough. The radon has an airspace, and they'll actually send people, they'll send a new radon vial in the mail and let them do it over and send it back. So So it seems to work out okay. What was the highest PFAS concentration detected? I don't know. I mean, in the thousands of parts per trillion, but I don't know exactly what. Generally, they come back, if they're above health limit, they'll be 5 parts per trillion or 15 parts per trillion, but sometimes we do, when the targeted PFAS sampling, when they're going to areas where they've tested it at a facility with a monitoring well nearby and found them in the thousands, then the households around those sites tend to be, some of them can be in the thousands. Okay, how do you support treatment when contaminants are detected? So we don't have a way to support treatment for natural contaminants. For the PFAS impacted folks, we've had that source I just mentioned, the trust fund drinking water that has been able from settlement funds to be utilized. For natural contaminants, well, I will say if somebody has PFAS and they also have arsenic, I always say, like, if you use a reverse osmosis system, that's gonna capture both. So, recommend doing that. And we always recommend point of use when whole house is not needed to lower the cost. How do you get the well owners' phone numbers? I assume that you mean when we're advertising the workshop. I'm not sure. Well, what I do with the workshops is I get a mailing list from our GIS specialist who takes the public water supply lines layer, and if they're not within a public water supply area and they're a residential parcel, he grabs their mailing address. So I get this list from him, and I send everyone postcards, and then they have to register by email, and then I collect all their information once they have registered for the workshop. For the targeted PFAS testing, I'm not sure, but I imagine they use a similar process. Oh, okay. Oh, thank you very much.